The birthday hall was glittering with balloons and laughter. I stood at the door, unseen, watching another man kneel beside my daughter to cut her cake. My wife's hand rested warmly on his back, smiling like the perfect family scene. No one noticed me, the man they once called Daddy. I smiled once, quietly, and turned away without saying a word. I had thought maybe, just maybe, there would be a seat left for me. Maybe there would be a fleeting glance, a wave, even a polite nod. I had told myself not to expect too much. After all, Sophia had said it was just a small gathering. Nothing formal, nothing fancy, just a few close friends and family. Yet as I stood there, invisible in a room full of laughter, I realized she had been telling the truth in her own way. It was small, just not small enough to include me. The other man, Makoto, of course, was playing the perfect substitute. He leaned down, helping Maria blow out the candles, his hand steadying hers, his voice warm and cheerful. The guests clapped, the cameras flashed, and for a moment, it looked like the world had shifted just slightly to make room for this new arrangement. Only I remained on the outside, a ghost at a party that was once mine to host. I stayed a little longer than I should have, watching. Not because I hoped for something to change, but because I needed to see it clearly, this new reality, this perfect picture Sophia had painted without me. It was important to see it with my own eyes. Important not to lie to myself anymore. Maria wore a pink frilly dress, one I had picked out with Sophia months ago, before everything cracked. She looked beautiful, radiant, laughing so freely that for a second, I almost forgot the weight in my chest. Almost. Then she looked up at Makoto with wide, adoring eyes and clung to his arm when he handed her a second slice of cake. I had never seen her look at me like that. I shifted my gaze to Sophia. She looked stunning, as always. Her hair perfectly curled, her dress elegant but understated. She had always known how to present the perfect image. And today, she had perfected it down to the last detail. The proud mother, the loving partner, the harmonious family. Only the wrong man stood beside her. The small gift bag in my hand felt heavier by the second. Inside was a handmade bracelet Maria and I had designed together during a quiet weekend almost a year ago. Back when she still came running to me, when she fell, when she still called out Daddy in her sleep. I tightened my grip on the bag and finally turned to leave. As I slipped outside, the cool evening air hit me like a wave. I stood under the string lights wrapped around the trees, each bulb flickering softly, casting pools of gentle light across the empty garden. I set the gift bag carefully on the bench nearest the door and walked away without looking back. I didn't get far before I heard footsteps behind me. For a second, foolishly, a part of me hoped it was Maria. Maybe she had seen me after all. Maybe she would run after me like she used to, her little arms outstretched, calling my name. But when I turned, it was Sophia. Alone. No Maria. No hesitation. Just annoyance in her eyes. "George," she said, her voice low and tight. "What are you doing here?" I shrugged, keeping my hands in my pockets. "It is Maria's birthday. I thought maybe I could be here for 5 minutes." I glanced at the door behind her, hearing another wave of laughter float out. She shifted uncomfortably, glancing over her shoulder. I thought we agreed. She trailed off, the unspoken words hanging between us. "I never agreed to anything," I said quietly. "You decided." She pressed her lips together, frustration flashing across her face. "George, we want a calm day. No drama. Makoto just came to support Maria. You showing up like this, it complicates things." I smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Don't worry. I won't complicate anything. I was just leaving." She hesitated, her hands tightening around the clutch bag she carried. There was a flicker of something in her eyes, guilt, maybe, or regret, but it vanished so quickly that I wondered if I had imagined it. "You should at least stay for cake," she said finally, voice brittle. The cake had already been cut, the candles already blown out, the birthday song already sung. I shook my head. "I think you've got it covered." I stepped past her, the cold air slicing deeper into my skin than it should have. She didn't call after me. She didn't ask me to stay. She just stood there, silent, watching me walk away. When I reached my car, parked at the far end of the lot where the party lights didn't reach, I sat behind the wheel for a long moment without starting the engine. My hands rested on the steering wheel, unmoving. I thought about the way Maria had looked at Makoto. I thought about the way Sophia had smiled for the cameras. I had been so sure, once upon a time, that family was something you could hold together by sheer force of will. That if you just loved hard enough, forgave long enough, endured patiently enough, it would all work out in the end. That night, staring into the dark, I realized how wrong I had been. Sometimes love is not enough. Sometimes the harder you hold on, the faster they pull away. I started the car and drove off into the night, not caring where I was headed, only knowing that it was away from a life that had already decided it no longer needed me. The road stretched endlessly ahead, but I barely noticed the lights, the turns, the hum of tires on asphalt. I drove without thinking, my mind pulling me backward to the days when things had been different, or at least when I thought they were. There was a time when Sophia's smile was genuine, when Maria's tiny hands clung to my fingers, trusting and sure. There was a time when I believed love, once planted, would bloom forever. When we first married, it wasn't perfect, but it was real. We were young, and the world still felt big enough to hold all our dreams. Sophia laughed easily back then, with a kind of softness that made every day feel lighter. She used to slip her hand into mine without thinking, like it was the most natural thing in the world. I still remember how she would lean her head against my shoulder during long drives, closing her eyes and humming quietly to the music. I lived for those small moments. I built my world around them. When Maria was born, it felt like everything had fallen into place. I had never been so afraid and so happy at once. I stayed up all night, just watching her breathe, terrified that something might go wrong, awestruck that something so perfect had come from us. Sophia cried when we brought her home, overwhelmed by the tiny bundle in her arms. I promised them both, silently, that no matter what storms came, I would keep them safe. For a while, we were exactly what people envied. The young family, the bright future, the endless possibilities. Our friends used to tease us about being disgustingly in love, about how we couldn't seem to stop smiling at each other. I thought those smiles would last forever. I thought the foundation we were building would never crack. I was wrong. It started with small things. Missed dinners, canceled plans, the nights she stayed out later and later, always with a casual excuse. New friends, new interests, new priorities. At first, I chalked it up to stress, to adjusting to motherhood, to the normal growing pains of any marriage. I didn't want to be the kind of husband who questioned or accused. I wanted to be the kind who supported, who understood. So I made excuses for her. She was tired. She was busy. She needed space. I picked up the slack without complaint, handled the late-night feedings, took over chores, scheduled her doctor's appointments when she forgot. When she snapped at me for small things, I let it go. When she forgot our anniversary, I laughed it off. When she started pulling away, I told myself it was just a phase. But phases are supposed to end. This one just deepened, spreading like cracks under the surface of a frozen lake. By the time I noticed how wide they had grown, it was too late. I remembered one winter evening more vividly than any other. Maria was 2, bundled up in a tiny red coat, and toddling around the backyard. It had snowed the night before, a soft, glittering layer that made the world look new. Sophia stood on the porch, arms crossed against the cold, scrolling through her phone. I called out to her to look. Maria had built her first crooked snowman, proud and beaming. Sophia glanced up, smiled briefly, then turned back to her phone. It hit me then, sharper than the cold biting my skin. She wasn't really there with us. She hadn't been for a long time. I tried to fix it. God, how I tried. Planned surprise dates. Left notes tucked into her purse. Made her favorite meals. Bought gifts for no reason at all. Each effort felt like throwing pebbles into a bottomless well, swallowed without a sound. Her smiles grew more forced, her laughter more brittle. I started to wonder if she even saw me anymore, or if I had become part of the furniture. Useful, invisible, replaceable. I told myself to hold on. For Maria, for the vows we had made, for the belief that love, real love, could survive anything. Even as the silence stretched longer at the dinner table, Even as Maria stopped asking for me first when she woke up crying in the night, even as Sophia's eyes stopped meeting mine when we spoke. There was one night, months before tonight's birthday party, that stayed with me like a scar. I came home late from a meeting, arms full of groceries because Sophia had mentioned offhand that morning that we were low on things. The house was dark. No dinner, no note, no sign of them. I checked my phone, no missed calls, no texts. I stood in the kitchen, groceries forgotten, listening to the hollow quiet. They had gone out, of course. Dinner with friends. Makoto was there too. I would find out later. Sophia would laugh, brushing it off like it was nothing. Just a friend. Just a harmless evening out. I stayed up that night, staring at the ceiling, the empty half of the bed cold against my back. I realized that night what I had refused to admit for months. I was already alone. I had just refused to accept it. The memories blurred together after that. The sharp ones stabbed deeper. The forgotten birthdays, the missed doctor appointments, the way Maria started asking Uncle Makoto for help before she turned to me. It wasn't sudden. It wasn't explosive. It was slow, a daily erosion, until all that remained was a hollow shell of a life we used to share. And yet, despite it all, despite the nights I fell asleep trying not to cry, despite the days I told myself I would leave, I stayed. I stayed because I love them. I stayed because I didn't know how to let go of the picture I had painted in my mind, the one where we were still a family, the one where love could fix anything. Sitting in my car now, the memory of that birthday party already fading into the night behind me, I finally understood the truth I had been too scared to face. You cannot love someone enough to make them stay. You cannot love someone enough to make them remember who you used to be to them. I glanced once more at the empty passenger seat, at the unopened gift bag lying on the dashboard. I reached over, picked it up, and tucked it into the glove compartment. Some things were too heavy to carry anymore. I started the engine again, the soft hum filling the silence, and pulled out onto the road. This time, I knew exactly where I was going. Away. The next morning, the message came in as if nothing had happened. A polite text from Sophia, short and clipped. Maria asked if you could join us for a small family dinner tonight. Just immediate relatives. 7 p.m. No apology. No acknowledgement of what had unfolded the night before. Just an invitation, as though I were a distant cousin, an obligation to be checked off the list. I stared at the screen for a long time before slipping the phone into my pocket without replying. Part of me knew I should ignore it. I owed them nothing anymore, not even my presence. But another part, one that still bled despite everything, wanted to see Maria one last time. Wanted to make sure she was truly happy, even if she was happier without me. So at 7 sharp, I arrived at the house I used to call home. It had not changed. Same manicured lawn, same white roses lining the walkway. Same front door I had painted myself the summer after Maria was born, while Sophia sat on the porch reading out baby-name books and laughing every few minutes. The laughter that had once filled this house felt like a ghost now, brushing against the edges of memory, but never settling. When the door opened, it was not Sophia who greeted me. It was her mother, cold-eyed, tight-lipped, surveying me like I was an unwanted delivery. "You're early," she said, stepping aside without real welcome. Inside, the living room was already full. Aunts, uncles, cousins I barely knew, friends of Sophia's parents. And, of course, Makoto, sitting far too comfortably in what used to be my armchair, laughing and sipping wine like he had lived here all his life. Maria spotted me and smiled hesitantly, waving. I smiled back, my heart twisting at how small that gesture had become between us. She did not run into my arms. She did not call out Daddy the way she once had, voice full of excitement and trust. She just waved politely, like a child taught to be nice to a stranger. Sophia approached, wearing a perfectly practiced smile. "George, glad you could make it." Her voice was light, public, carefully distant, like a hostess greeting an old acquaintance at a charity ball. I nodded, the words sticking in my throat. For a moment, we stood there, two people pretending to be civil, pretending the last 7 years had not unraveled into ash. Dinner was a performance. Every word, every laugh, every toast carefully choreographed to maintain the illusion of family. They passed dishes around the table, smiling for the cameras someone had inexplicably brought along, as if documenting proof of a happy gathering. And all the while, I sat there, a silent witness to my own erasure. Makoto dominated the conversation, telling stories about Maria's school events, her favorite cartoons, her piano recitals. Stories that should have been mine to tell. Every now and then, Sophia would glance at me, quick and sharp, as if daring me to interrupt. I didn't. I let the play unfold, scene after scene, with the calm detachment of a man watching his own funeral. When the dessert came out, a ridiculous mountain of cream and strawberries, Maria giggled and leaned against Makoto's side. He bent down and whispered something to her, making her laugh harder. Sophia's mother clapped her hands delightedly, as if they had just won a prize. "You must be so proud," she said loudly, turning to Sophia. "Makoto is such a wonderful influence on Maria." Finally, someone reliable. I picked up my glass of water and drank slowly to hide the bitterness rising in my chest. Reliable, a word once used to describe me, too, before it became a synonym for boring. Disposable. Someone clinked their glass with a spoon, calling for a speech. Sophia rose, smiling that same detached smile, and raised her glass. "To family," she said, "to new beginnings, and to the people who truly care about Maria's happiness." The message could not have been clearer if she had stabbed it into my chest. I excused myself before dessert was finished. No one protested. No one rushed to stop me at the door. Not even Maria, who was too busy showing Makoto her new dollhouse to notice. As I stepped into the night, the door closed softly behind me. No slamming, no shouting, just a quiet click, final and absolute. I drove home on autopilot, my mind strangely blank. Inside my small apartment, I sat at the kitchen table staring at the envelope that had been sitting there for days. Divorce papers, already signed by me, neatly prepared, silent, final. I pulled out a pen and, after a long moment, scribbled a date in the space reserved for delivery to respondent. Tomorrow. No more waiting. No more hoping for things to fix themselves. As I slid the papers back into the envelope, my hand brushed against a small photo tucked between the pages. A family picture taken 3 years ago. Maria perched on my shoulders, laughing wildly. Sophia standing beside me, arm wrapped around my waist, both of us smiling like the future was ours to command. I stared at it for a long time. Then, with a small sigh, I placed it face down on the table. It was not anger I felt, not hatred, just a deep, aching emptiness where something precious had once lived. I leaned back in the chair, closing my eyes for a moment, letting the finality of it wash over me. The man they had needed, the provider, the protector, the steady hand, was no longer required. And the man I had once been, the dreamer, the lover, the fighter, was gone too, worn away by years of trying to be enough for people who had already decided they wanted something else. I had loved them. God knows I had loved them with everything I had. But love, I realize now, is not enough when you're the only one holding the pieces together. The clock on the wall ticked steadily, indifferent to my quiet devastation. In the distance, a siren wailed, then faded into the night. Life moved on. So would I. I stood up, slipped the envelope into my briefcase, and turned off the kitchen light. Tomorrow, I would send the papers. Tomorrow, I would take the first real step toward a life that no longer begged for scraps of affection. Tomorrow, I would finally let go. Morning arrived wrapped in a dull gray mist. It matched my mood perfectly. I woke without an alarm, not because I was well rested, but because sleep had barely touched me. My mind had stayed restless through the night, replaying memories I wished I could forget and conversations I wished I had never had. I moved through my morning routine methodically, packing only the essentials into a small suitcase. A few clothes, important documents, the folder containing Maria's old drawing she had made for me when she was 3. I left the rest. Furniture, dishes, books, none of it mattered anymore. None of it was really mine. The divorce papers sat on the kitchen table where I had left them. I placed them carefully into a courier envelope, sealing them with a firm hand. They would be delivered to Sophia's office, directly into her hands. There would be no confusion, no delay, no chance for second thoughts. The decision had been made. There was no turning back. I paused for a moment by the front door, keys in hand, looking around the small apartment. It had been my refuge for months, but it had never truly felt like home. Home was not walls or furniture. It was people. It was belonging. And whatever had once made this city feel like home had long since withered and died. Outside, the air was crisp with the promise of autumn. The leaves were beginning to turn, edges curling into shades of gold and red. I stood for a moment, watching them swirl along the sidewalk, tiny storms of color dancing without a care. Freedom, I thought, looked a lot like that. The Courier office was a small shop tucked between a coffee house and a bookstore. The clerk behind the counter barely glanced at me as I handed over the envelope, paying extra to ensure same-day delivery. As I stepped outside, a strange lightness settled over me, a weight I had carried for years suddenly lifting from my shoulders. For the first time in a long while, I had no one to report to, no one to please, no one whose approval determined my worth. I walked without a destination, letting my feet carry me through the city I had once known so well. Past the park where Maria had taken her first wobbly steps. Past the cafe where Sophia and I had spent lazy Sunday mornings planning imaginary vacations we never took. Past the bookstore where I had bought the first gift Sophia ever accepted without a polite smile and a return receipt. Every corner held a memory, some warm, some cold, all distant now. I wasn't bitter. I wasn't angry. I was simply done. By noon, I found myself at the university hospital, a place I hadn't visited in years. Not since my mother had been moved to another facility after her condition worsened. I didn't know why I came, maybe to say goodbye, maybe to remind myself why I had fought so hard for so long. The nurse at the front desk smiled kindly when she saw me. "She's stable today," she said softly. "More lucid than yesterday." I nodded and made my way to the small, sunlit room at the end of the hall. My mother lay there, frail but peaceful, a book resting lightly on her lap. When she saw me, her face lit up with a smile that made my throat tighten. "George," she said, her voice thin but steady. "You look tired." I laughed quietly, pulling a chair close to her bedside. "It's been a long week." She studied me with those sharp eyes that had always seen through every lie, every mask I had ever worn. "But you did what you had to do," she said. "Didn't you?" I didn't answer right away. I reached out, taking her hand in mine, feeling the fragile strength that still pulsed there. "I finally let go," I said. "For real this time." She nodded slowly. "Good. Some things aren't meant to be held on to, no matter how tightly you grip them." I stayed with her for a long time, talking about nothing and everything, letting the silence fill the spaces where words failed. When visiting hours ended, I kissed her forehead and promised I would visit again soon. This time, when I left the hospital, the sadness wasn't crushing. It was just part of life, part of moving forward. That evening, I boarded a plane. No dramatic goodbyes, no tearful last looks. Just a seat by the window, a bag under my feet, and a one-way ticket to a place where no one knew my name. As the plane ascended, the city shrank below me, a web of lights and memories that grew smaller and smaller until it vanished into the clouds. I rested my forehead against the cold glass and closed my eyes. The life I had built here, the marriage, the family, the dreams, was over. It had ended not with a bang, not with a fight, but with a quiet turning away. And somehow that felt right. Explosions leave scars. Silence allows healing. When the plane touched down hours later, I stepped into a crisp, unfamiliar world. New language, new streets, new beginnings. It was terrifying and exhilarating all at once. At the airport, Willow was waiting for me, a wide smile lighting up her face as she waved from across the terminal. She had been the first to offer help when I reached out, the first to tell me that starting over wasn't failure, it was courage. "Welcome home," she said, handing me a cup of steaming coffee. "Home," I repeated softly, tasting the word on my tongue like something foreign and new. As we walked toward the exit together, the world outside stretched vast and endless. For For the first time in what felt like forever, I wasn't trapped by old promises, broken dreams, or fading photographs. I was free, and this time I wasn't going to waste it. It took 2 days for Sophia to realize something was wrong. At first, she thought the courier had made a mistake, that maybe George had sent the papers by accident, that surely, after a few angry texts or a cold conversation, he would come crawling back like he always had, hurt, resentful, but still tethered to the family he couldn't bear to lose. But this time was different. He didn't answer her calls. Not once. Not even a cold, clipped reply. His number, once etched in her daily habits like breathing, now rang to voicemail with mechanical indifference. She emailed him, a long message filled with justifications, excuses dressed up as regrets, ending with a plea for one more conversation. The email bounced back, address not found. Her chest tightened the first time it happened, but she pushed it down. Maybe he was angry. Maybe he needed time. She told herself he would cool off. He always did. She told herself she still had control. On the third morning, Maria padded into the kitchen in her pajamas, hair tousled, rubbing sleep from her eyes. "Mommy," she asked, tugging at Sophia's sleeve, "when is Daddy coming to visit?" Sophia froze, the coffee pot halfway to her cup. She forced a smile onto her face, bending down to stroke Maria's hair. "Soon, baby," she lied. "Daddy's just busy with work right now." Maria frowned, unconvinced. "He didn't call on my birthday," she said quietly. "Not even to sing." Sophia felt a stab of guilt so sharp it made her flinch. She kissed the top of Maria's head, whispering empty reassurances she didn't believe herself. When Maria returned to her cartoons, Sophia sat at the kitchen table, clutching her phone like it was a lifeline. She opened her messages and scrolled. No new replies. No missed calls. Just the courier's notification 2 days ago confirming delivery of the divorce papers. She had crumpled the envelope into the trash without even opening it. At the time, it had felt like a victory. Let him throw tantrums, she had thought. He would come back. He always did. He needed her more than she needed him. Or so she believed. Now, sitting there in the pale morning light, she wasn't so sure. Out of impulse, or maybe desperation, she called one of their mutual friends. David, an old college buddy of George's who occasionally sent birthday cards to Maria. David answered after a few rings, his voice guarded. "Sophia," he said, "what do you need?" "I'm looking for George," she said, trying to keep her tone casual. "Have you heard from him?" There was a pause. A long one. "He's moved on," David said carefully. "Maybe you should too." "What do you mean moved on?" she snapped before she could stop herself. David sighed. "I mean he's gone. Left the country. New job. New life. He's not coming back." The words dropped into her stomach like stones. She opened her mouth to argue, to demand explanations, but the line had already gone dead. Gone. Gone. Sophia sat there for a long time, staring blankly at the dark screen of her phone. She thought she had been punishing him by pushing him away, by replacing him so casually in the family he had fought to hold together. She thought she had been the one in control, that he would always be there, just beyond her reach, waiting to be needed again. She never thought he would be the one to leave for good. The day dragged on in a blur. Sophia went through the motions, meetings, calls, business lunches, but everything felt hollow. She couldn't focus, couldn't stop thinking about the finality of it, about how easily George had slipped out of their lives, leaving no thread for her to tug on, no door left open to walk through. That evening, when Maria went to bed clutching the teddy bear George had given her years ago, Sophia sat alone in the living room, staring at the fireplace without seeing it. She finally picked up the divorce papers from the trash, smoothing out the wrinkles with trembling hands. She read them line by line, as if the cold legal language might somehow hold a secret message, some hidden loophole that would tell her this wasn't real, that there was still a way back. There wasn't. No claims on assets, no demand for custody, no accusations, no bitterness. Just one clean, quiet request. Let me go. Tears blurred her vision, dripping onto the parchment like tiny explosions of regret. She pressed the papers to her chest, curling over them as though she could absorb the forgiveness she had once taken for granted. In the silence of the house, She remembered things she had long buried. The nights George had stayed up late, making Maria's birthday decorations by hand, because Sophia was too tired. The way he had carried her through storms, literal and emotional, without ever once asking to be thanked. The times he had reached for her hand in public, proud to call her his wife, even when her affection grew colder. All of it came back now, crashing over her like a tide she could no longer hold back. She had thought Makoto's attention could fill the void. That admiration from others could replace the quiet, enduring love George had given her so freely. She had been so sure that George needed her more than she needed him. But it wasn't true. It had never been true. In chasing something shinier, newer, easier, she had destroyed something irreplaceable. The next morning, she packed a small bag for Maria and drove to her mother's estate, hoping to leave the child there for a few days while she tried to untangle the mess in her heart. But even her mother, once so eager to tear George down, offered little sympathy. "You made your bed," her mother said curtly when Sophia tried to explain through choked sobs. "Now lie in it." For the first time in her adult life, Sophia realized there was no one left to blame. Not George, not Makoto, not even her mother. It was her, all her. When she returned home that evening, she wandered the empty halls like a ghost. She found herself in the study, pulling out old photo albums she hadn't touched in years. Page after page of memories smiled up at her. Birthdays, holidays, random Sunday mornings filled with lazy breakfasts and messy living rooms. In every picture, George's arm was wrapped around her or Maria. Always steady, always present, always loving. The weight of it crushed her. At midnight, she stood on the back porch, staring up at a sky full of stars. She whispered into the darkness, a plea too late to matter. "Come home," she said, her voice cracking. Only the wind answered, cold and uncaring. In the distance, a new day was already beginning to stir. But not for her. The new city smelled different. Crisper somehow, cleaner, filled with the muted noise of lives I wasn't yet a part of. For once, that thought didn't depress me. It was freeing. Here, no one knew me as Sophia's husband, or Maria's father, or the man who had lost everything trying to save something already gone. I was just George. Nothing more, nothing less. The first few weeks were a blur of logistics, setting up a new apartment, filing papers for my job, attending endless onboarding sessions. It should have been exhausting, overwhelming even, but I welcomed the distraction. Each task completed felt like laying a new brick on a fresh foundation. My workplace was a sprawling campus of glass buildings and green lawns, full of sharp minds and endless ambition. It was the kind of place where the past didn't matter, only what you could build next. People greeted me with curiosity, not pity. They didn't see a man broken by divorce or battered by betrayal. They saw potential. For the first time in years, I saw it too. Willow, true to her word, stayed close without hovering. She introduced me to colleagues, helped me navigate the labyrinth of university politics, and made sure I never ate lunch alone unless I wanted to. She never asked about Sophia, never pried. She just let me breathe. In quiet moments, I found myself marveling at how easy it was to exist without fear of judgment. How strange it felt to laugh without checking who was watching. How light my chest felt when I woke in the morning without dread pooling in my stomach. The work itself was challenging but exhilarating. Research projects I had once only dreamed of now filled my days. Late nights in the lab, brainstorming sessions with brilliant minds, quiet victories when an experiment finally succeeded. These moments stitched together a new version of myself, one that was harder, wiser, but still capable of joy. It wasn't all perfect. There were nights when loneliness crept in, when I would wake from restless dreams, reaching for a warmth that was no longer there. Times when the sound of a child's laughter on the street would make my throat tighten unbearably. But the pain was quieter now, less like a knife, more like a scar, aching sometimes but no longer bleeding. Meanwhile, back across the ocean, news trickled in through mutual acquaintances I hadn't entirely cut off. Sophia's life was unraveling slowly, not with the drama she might have feared, but with the steady erosion of everything she once took for granted. The Kim family's company, already under pressure, struggled with internal scandals. Rumors of mismanagement surfaced. Partnerships she had carefully cultivated began to slip away. Friends who had once clung to her influence now drifted toward more stable alliances. Even Makoto, it turned out, had overplayed his hand. Without Sophia's protection, he found himself isolated, his petty schemes exposed for what they were. I didn't celebrate her downfall. I didn't even feel satisfaction. It was simply inevitable. Actions have consequences. Seeds you plant in cruelty grow thorns, not flowers. Sophia reached out once. An email sent through a work account she knew I couldn't easily block. It was short, hesitant, almost apologetic. "Maria misses you," it said. "If you ever want to visit, we would welcome it." I closed the message without replying. I didn't trust myself to answer kindly, and I refused to answer cruelly. Some wounds were best left untouched. Instead, I focused on what mattered now. My mother's health was improving steadily, her doctors optimistic for the first time in years. Every evening after work, I would stop by her room, bringing little treats, new books, flowers to brighten the sterile space. Her smiles grew stronger. Her voice, once a whisper of defeat, gained new strength each day. "You look happy," she told me one evening, watching as I sorted through the stack of research notes I had brought with me. "I am," I said, surprised to realize how true it was. She nodded sagely. "You always were, when you were doing what you loved. Don't ever give that up again for anyone." I promised her I wouldn't. Sometimes Willow would join us, sitting by the window chatting with my mother as the sun dipped low outside. She had a way of making people feel at ease, of filling silences without smothering them. I didn't know when it started, but seeing her there, laughing softly at my mother's dry jokes, became one of the quiet joys of my week. One evening, as we were leaving the hospital together, Willow paused under the canopy of a blossoming tree, the petals scattering like snow around her. "You're different now," she said thoughtfully, brushing a flower from her hair. "Better or worse?" I asked with a half-smile. "Stronger," she said simply, "and lighter, like you finally remembered how to breathe." I didn't know what to say to that, so I just smiled, and for once it didn't feel forced. The seasons changed around us. Fall gave way to winter, and with it came new responsibilities, new challenges, new victories. I spoke at conferences, published papers that drew attention from corners of the academic world I had once only admired from afar. People shook my hand, asked for my opinion, treated me like someone who mattered. And slowly, day by day, the past loosened its grip. I still miss Maria. Some nights, when the city lights blurred into stars, I wondered what she was doing, if she remembered the sound of my voice, the way I used to tuck her in and whisper silly bedtime stories until she fell asleep giggling. But love, I had learned, wasn't always about holding on. Sometimes it was about letting go, even if it broke your heart. I would always love my daughter. Nothing could change that. But my life was no longer chained to a door that had been closed in my face. I had found another one, wide open, filled with light, waiting for me to walk through. It was nearly spring when she found me. I had just finished a lecture at the university, my notes still tucked under my arm, when I saw her standing at the edge of the campus courtyard. She was out of place among the students and professors, like a lost figure from another life. Her hair was pulled back too tightly, her coat too thin for the lingering chill in the air. But it was the look in her eyes that gave her away, desperation barely concealed behind a brittle smile. For a moment, neither of us moved. I could have pretended not to see her, could have turned back into the building, into the crowd, into the life I had built without her. But something inside me, perhaps a final courtesy to the ghost of what we once shared, kept me rooted. Sophia crossed the courtyard slowly, each step seeming heavier than the last. When she finally reached me, she opened her mouth, but no words came out. Her hands trembled where they gripped the strap of her bag. I waited silent. "George," she said finally, her voice cracking around the name. "Can we talk?" I nodded once, cool but polite. She gestured toward a bench nearby, and we sat without touching, the space between us wide and heavy. For a while, all she did was stare at her hands. twisting her wedding band, the one she had stopped wearing years ago but now somehow wore again, as if it could undo what time had already claimed. "I heard about your work," she said at last, forcing a small smile. "You're doing amazing things. Everyone says so." I inclined my head slightly, offering no more than the truth deserved. Praise from her meant nothing now. It floated harmlessly past me, unable to cling. She swallowed hard. "Maria misses you. She asks about you all the time." A flicker of pain moved through me, too fast to show. I let it pass. "I write to her," I said simply. "I know," Sophia whispered. "She keeps every letter, every little gift." Her hands twisted tighter around the bag. She was unraveling, piece by piece, but still fighting to hold her mask in place. "I was wrong," she said, the words spilling out now, rushed and messy. "About everything. About Makoto. About us." I said nothing. What was there left to say? "I thought I was choosing security," she continued, her voice shaking. I thought you would always be there. I didn't realize I was killing everything good between us." She looked at me then, really looked, and for the first time I saw it. The raw regret. The knowledge that some mistakes cannot be undone no matter how many tears are shed afterward. "I miss you," she whispered. "I miss the way you used to look at me. Like I mattered. Like I was enough." I let the silence stretch between us, heavy and final. "You were enough," I said quietly. "You just didn't believe it." Her face crumpled. For a moment, I thought she might break down entirely. But she bit her lip until it bled and forced herself still. "I don't expect you to forgive me," she said. I just wanted you to know." I nodded. Not with anger. Not with pity. Just acceptance. Sophia drew a trembling breath. "Would you ever consider coming back?" "Not for me. For Maria." I closed my eyes briefly, the ache in my chest sharper than I had expected. "For Maria. Always, always for Maria. I will always be your father," I said softly. "But I won't come back to that life. Not to the house. Not to the past." Tears slipped down her cheeks unchecked, but she didn't wipe them away. "I understand," she said, and for the first time, I believed her. Sophia stood slowly, every movement weighed down by the sorrow she could no longer deny. She hesitated, as if waiting for me to stop her, to offer a different ending to this meeting. But I remained still. "Goodbye, George," she said, her voice breaking. "Goodbye, Sophia," I replied, steady. She walked away without looking back. I sat there for a long time after she disappeared, letting the quiet settle around me. I thought about all we had been, all we had lost, and I let it all go, piece by piece, like sand slipping through open fingers. That night, I went to the hospital to see my mother. She was sitting up in bed, knitting a crooked scarf with more enthusiasm than skill. When she saw me, she beamed. "Rough day?" she asked, seeing the tiredness in my eyes. "Not rough," I said, pulling up a chair beside her. "Just necessary." She nodded wisely. "The hardest part about healing," she said, "is realizing that not everyone will heal with you." I smiled, leaning back in the chair, letting her quiet wisdom wash over the last lingering ache. Later, as I walked home under a sky blanketed with stars, I felt lighter than I had in years. Sophia's chapter in my life was closed. Permanently. Not with hate. Not even with bitterness. Just acceptance. At my apartment, there was a small package waiting. No name, no sender. Just a child's scrawled handwriting. Inside was a simple drawing, Maria's. It showed 3 stick figures, a little girl, a woman, and a man standing under a bright sun. The man's figure was smaller, off to the side, but still smiling. In Maria's careful block letters at the bottom, it said, "Daddy loves me." Tears burned my eyes, but I smiled through them. Maybe she would not understand everything now. Maybe not for years. But someday she would know. I never stopped loving her, even when I had to love her from afar. As I placed the drawing carefully on my bookshelf, next to my research awards and new life trophies, I realized something profound. I had not lost everything. I had simply outgrown what was never meant to stay. And sometimes, growing up meant walking away without hatred, without anger, and building something new from the ruins. Something stronger. Something that was finally, unmistakably mine. The seasons shifted again, this time with a gentler hand. Spring softened the city's edges, spilling flowers across sidewalks and painting the trees in tender greens. It was the kind of spring that promised new beginnings, not just in the world outside, but deep within me too. My mother's recovery exceeded every expectation. She grew stronger by the day, her laughter returning in bursts that filled the hospital corridors like forgotten music. The doctors talked about moving her into assisted living soon, only temporarily, until she felt confident enough to live independently again. She teased them relentlessly about it, insisting she would be back running marathons in no time. Watching her strength return was like watching a part of myself heal, too. One afternoon, after another successful therapy session, she sat me down in the hospital garden, a blanket draped over her lap and sunlight painting golden lines across her face. "You know," she said, plucking at the blanket's edge, "you've changed. Hopefully for the better," I replied with a small smile. "For the stronger," she corrected, "and the wiser." I let the words settle, warm and sure. "It cost a lot to get here." She nodded, her eyes kind but knowing. "The best things always do." A gentle breeze stirred the trees around us, carrying the scent of new flowers. She leaned closer, lowering her voice conspiratorially. "So, when are you bringing that lovely senior sister of yours over for dinner?" I laughed, caught off guard by the bluntness. "Mom," I protested, shaking my head. "I'm serious," she insisted, the mischief sparkling in her eyes. "I may be old, but I'm not blind. That girl looks at you like you hung the stars." I opened my mouth to argue, but no words came out. Because she was right. Willow had been there every step of the way. Not pushing, not demanding, just being steady, like a lighthouse blinking patiently through every storm. Maybe I'd been too busy surviving to notice. Or maybe I'd been too afraid to hope again. Later that evening, I found Willow in the university library, hunched over a stack of papers, her brows furrowed in concentration. She looked up when she saw me, and her smile was so easy, so unguarded, that it felt like stepping into sunlight after years of rain. I walked over and sat across from her without asking, just being near her, feeling the quiet peace that always seemed to follow wherever she went. "Big day tomorrow," she said, closing her notebook. "Your mother gets discharged." I nodded. She's excited. She's already making plans to redecorate her new apartment. Willow chuckled. "She's unstoppable. I see where you get it." We sat in comfortable silence for a while, the low hum of the library around us. Finally, I said, almost too quietly, "You've been there for me more than anyone else." Willow looked at me seriously, no teasing in her eyes. "Because you're worth it." It was such a simple sentence, such a simple truth, and yet it cracked something open inside me that I hadn't even realized was still locked away. I reached across the table, covering her hand with mine. "I don't want to walk this road alone anymore," I said, voice steady. Willow squeezed my hand gently, her smile soft and certain. "You never had to." It wasn't a confession. It wasn't a grand declaration. It was something quieter, older, more real. A beginning, not a replacement. A future, not a patch for the past. The next day was bright and cloudless. My mother walked out of the hospital, leaning only slightly on her cane, head held high, a grin stretching across her face. I drove her to her new apartment, Willow riding beside me in the passenger seat, the three of us laughing like a family who had weathered 100 storms and still found reason to celebrate. After helping her settle in, Willow and I returned to the university grounds. There was a small celebration planned for the publication of our research paper, a gathering of colleagues, students, professors. Nothing fancy, but it felt like a milestone just the same. As I stood at the edge of the lawn, watching the group toast and chatter, I realized something startling. I was happy, not the fragile, desperate kind of happiness I had clung to before, always one argument away from crumbling, but the quiet, steady kind that seeped into your bones and stayed there, even when life wasn't perfect. Sophia never appeared again. Her final message, sent weeks ago, had been brief. A photograph of Maria holding a new teddy bear, smiling shyly at the camera, a simple caption underneath, "Thank you, Daddy." I hadn't replied. Some things didn't need words. Later that night, as Willow and I walked along the riverbank, the city lights shimmering on the water, she bumped her shoulder lightly against mine. "Hey," she said, grinning. "You never told me what you wished for." I raised an eyebrow. At New Year's," she said. "Everyone was making wishes. You just smiled and stayed quiet." I thought about it for a moment, then said simply, "Peace." She tilted her head, considering. And I smiled, feeling the truth deep in my chest. And I got it. She laughed, a clear, beautiful sound, and slipped her hand into mine without hesitation. We didn't need grand promises. We didn't need guarantees. We just needed to walk forward side by side into whatever tomorrow had waiting. The past was a closed chapter now, not forgotten, not erased, but finished. A story I had lived, learned from, and finally gently set down. Ahead of us, the bridge arched over the river, lit by golden lanterns, a path leading into the unknown. I squeezed Willow's hand lightly, and together, we stepped onto it, leaving the ghost behind. Toward something new, toward something better, toward home.